Welcome to the All Things Endurance podcast. I'm your host, Rick Prince, and I'm excited to have on the podcast today for the third and final podcast in this series, Zoë Rom and Kylee Van Horn. Welcome, guys.
Great to be
Hi.
back.
So today we're going to be talking about, like I said, it's the last in a three-part series, when performance meets appearance, body image, and endurance sports. So Zoë and Kylee, for listeners that might be new to this series or don't or aren't familiar with you guys, if you could give a little bit of background about each of you.
Yeah, well, I am a journalist slash ultra runner slash person very curious about how food, fitness, and nutrition show up both in science and in culture. I love writing about science, and I feel like food and diet and nutrition is really where the rubber meets the road of sort of like scientific theory and how we can apply those things to actual lived experience, particularly as athletes.
Nice.
And I'm Kylee Van Horn. I'm an endurance sports dietitian and owner of Fly Nutrition. And I feel like I bring the real world experience to the podcast here, just working every day with runners, cyclists, skiers on their relationship to food, their bodies, nutrition, and even people that think that maybe this doesn't apply to them. Oftentimes, when I'm working with people, digging a little bit deeper, our stories, our food stories kind of impact our choices and the ways we fuel ourselves as athletes. So, feel like that's kind of that component that I'm bringing here.
Yeah, I bring the questions, she brings the answers.
There you go. And I should also say that both of you are the co-hosts of Your Diet Sucks podcast, which is amazing. So if any of our listeners want to get some good nutrition information, check out their podcast. All right. So to kick things off, when it comes to endurance sports, I think there's certainly an emphasis on body weight, as we've discussed in the other podcasts, primarily from a performance standpoint. I feel like what's not discussed often when it comes to endurance sports is the body image and more of the aesthetic point of view, because there's so much focus on a performance. But maybe you guys could discuss these two areas, performance and aesthetics, and how they sort of interrelate and how that works out as far as why maybe people get into endurance sports and maybe what some of the issues might be when people are trying to fuel for endurance sports as it pertains to the aesthetic side of things.
Yeah. To speak to the aesthetic side of things, research indicates that folks who engage in like aesthetically oriented sports, thinking like gymnastics, or endurance sports, especially like more weight centric ones like cycling, skimo, even running, folks who do that have like higher instances of anxiety around body image and aesthetics. And
Hmm.
a lot of athletes feel the pressure to look the part, to like inhabit a certain type of body because culture, magazines, advertisements, so many things have given us this sort of false image of what an athlete or what a runner or a cyclist or whatever looks like, regardless of how much it improves performance. And unfortunately, our brains are really good at registering aesthetic information and a little bit less good at registering actual logic and what the science says about racing weight.
Hmm.
And then I feel like there's people get into endurance sports for different reasons, right? Some athletes that I've worked with, they do endurance sports because they're like trying to get healthier or lose weight. And then they get into the sport and they're like, but I don't look like those people, like these other runners. And so they feel this pressure in their journey to maybe like want to shrink themselves like even more, like to look a certain way. Or I've had athletes that are like, well, I weigh this amount, but I don't look like that. So I
Hmm.
want to like change my body composition so I look like that professional runner or something, you know? And so so in practice, I see a lot of focus on, well, that person runs this time and they look this way, so I need to also look this way.
Yeah,
I
and
see.
so it's interesting. I found there was actually a 2018 study, which was one of the like more high quality studies I could find, that found that weight control was cited with 53% of those surveyed as being the reason that they started running. So like a lot of
Ah,
people come to endurance sports with that in mind, but research into psychology and motivation reveals that focusing on weight or appearance isn't a sustainable driver, even if it's what maybe brings people to movement and exercise. It's not an effective way of keeping you in the game and sustaining that motivation long term. So, again, it brings people in, but it can't keep people in and it can't sustain the level of engagement that you need to really progress when it comes to mastery or just like long-term health and well-being. There is also some really interesting evidence that suggests that athletes in general actually tend to have better body image than the general population.
hmm.
So I think we can hold this tension in our hands that like a lot of us athletes have a different relationship with our body and a different appreciation for it because we get to enjoy it in all of these different contexts and we get to appreciate the function that it grants us and the adventures and the competition and connection to other people that it grants us. And we can admit that our sports have a bit of a strain of weight stigma and that diet culture still inflects a lot of the messaging and communications in our world. And so while athletes do tend to have a better body image, I still think there's a good ways to go when it comes to continuing to have these hard discussions and sort of recalibrating our expectations and imagery of who an athlete is.
I'd be curious
Yeah.
about that whole thing about having better body image. Sometimes I hear, if I'm training a lot, I have better body image, but it's like almost this form of like control of like, oh, I'm exercising more, so I feel better about my body in
Right.
itself. And I just am curious. That's
Like
curious.
when your relationship with your body is contingent on how it's performing, that puts you on
Yeah.
really precarious grounds. Again, and this is all observational data,
Yeah.
right? Like you can't do a randomized controlled trial where you force some people to become endurance athletes, although that would be pretty fun.
Yeah. Well, Zoe, I'm really glad you said that because that was sort of my next question was, how many people get into endurance sports with, body image being the number one reason? And so here's a question, I guess, for you guys then. Of the people that are in endurance sports, that are sort of focused on the image, do you think there's a lot of people out there, Kylie, to your point, they're like, look, I'm okay, I can run an 8 minute mile, but I'm not a real runner because I don't look like these people. Do you think there's a lot of that? I'm not a real cyclist, triathlete, runner, ultra runner because I don't look like to your point, guys, what's in the magazines, what I see, I don't look like Killian Jornet. I don't look like, Courtney Dauwalter. Like, is that a thing?
Yeah. Oh,
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, it's
100%.
it's huge. And I also think then that downplays like an athlete or how someone identifies as like quote an athlete and how they treat their bodies because a lot of
Hmm.
people then will justify that, well, my nutrition needs are not really that important or they don't apply to me because like I'm not an athlete or I'm not Killian Jornet or
Right.
something like that. Um so yeah, I think that it's very common for that to occur in the space. It's something that I interact with on a daily basis with athletes.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. Could you guys explain what traditional body positivity is and maybe how it misses the mark when it just in totality?
Yeah. So, body positivity really emerged from the fat acceptance and feminist movements in the 1960s and 70s. And the core idea was that all bodies are good bodies, worthy of dignity, respect, representation. And there was a pushback against these really narrow beauty standards that idealized and continue to thin, white, able-bodied figures.
Hmm.
Fast forward to about the 2010s, brands and social media really came in hot and started to co-opt that message. I'm thinking of this, we all remember the Dove soap commercial that was very like
Yeah.
self-congratulatory that it just had like normal ass women using
Right.
soap in it. And that
Yeah.
was like groundbreaking and like a lot of think pieces written again about normal women using normal soap because that's where the bar is for our culture. And it was sort of like this, the messaging was like, love your body at any size, but it really started to become inherently tied to consumer marketing. We saw a lot of celebrities and influencers popularizing it. But again, a lot of the people espousing this ideology fit the cultural ideal of beauty and what an athlete looks like anyway. So I feel like that started to really dilute body positivity's more political roots. I think it can miss the mark because it puts pressure on folks to love themselves all the time. I don't think
Mm,
that's realistic for a lot of folks. Think it can feel invalidating for people who struggle with body image or eating disorders. I think a lot of these feelings can be a continuum, but when you put it as like a pass fail on loving yourself, I think that sort of makes it hard for folks to sort of dip a toe into the acceptance waters. And it's
mm.
still centered on appearance. So it doesn't question the overall, like, huh, why do we have this assumption that
Well,
appearance
that's a good point.
doesn't matter at all? It still feeds into that. It still creates a body hierarchy, and it emphasizes that how bodies look, rather than focusing on how people feel in their bodies and how they move in their bodies. And again, because of the sort of like consumerist origins, a lot of these campaigns continue to feature thin, able-bodied, conventionally attractive people, leaving out larger, disabled, trans, older bodies. And it still sort of has this pervasive individual responsibility narrative that puts the onus on people to like just love yourself. Like, why can't you just, buck
Yeah.
up and like
Yeah.
be
Just do it.
about your body, despite the fact that we've been yelling at you to lose weight your entire adult life. And it doesn't address systemic issues like weight stigma in healthcare, media bias, or sort of the larger systemic issues that a lot of these body discussions are inherently meshed in.
God, yeah, it's a much more complicated issue than just putting out a statement or putting out a
Yes,
hey, love
soap
yourself.
didn't fix it.
Yeah, interesting. So moving on, speaking of as far as topics that maybe some of our listeners don't understand or aren't even familiar with, what is body dysmorphia? And maybe you could, guys, in addition to defining it, could also discuss sort of how that shows up in endurance sports.
Yeah, so I'll just touch on the more clinical background side of things, and I'll let Kylie speak to where the rubber meets the road here. But the clinical term body dysmorphic disorder, or BDD, is a mental health condition where someone becomes preoccupied with perceived flaws in their appearance, that are often minor or invisible to others. So it's like a hyperfixation that goes beyond not just liking how you look. I think a lot of times the term body dysmorphia can get thrown around colloquially, and because body dissatisfaction is pretty pervasive in our culture, there's actually studies that show that women will lean on like a collective discontent as being a means of bonding,
Hmm.
like the let's all have a conversation where we discuss the various things we dislike about our body because that's
Okay.
become normalized. And so what BDD is, besides just sort of like an ambient, like I don't like how I look, or even like an unhealthy sort of thought process around food and body image, it involves obsessive thoughts, compulsive behaviors like mirror checking, comparison, and body monitoring.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, so I feel like in practice, I see it, you mentioned the women like collectively getting together. I feel like I hear from athletes a lot like I was on my long run or my long ride and like everyone was just talking about like how much they hated their like thighs or their stomach or whatever, and then it has this effect on how you choose then to fuel or not fuel yourself. So it's almost this collective like, well, we all feel bad about our bodies and how we view them, so we're not going to fuel ourselves because we still think that we need to lose this last like 5 pounds or something. And so I think, it's interesting to kind of take a look at that in the context of how, the way that we're viewing ourselves and the way that we talk about ourselves with others as endurance athletes can impact our kind of fueling habits too.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you said that too, because I'm imagining sort of this group run with like, 10 runners or so, 10 females all talking about it. And then to your point, it's sort of normalized because then everyone's like, oh, yeah, we'll just, it's one thing if I think it, but if the other nine people around me are doing the same thing, then it's sort of like, well, this is just normal to not eat and,
Yeah.
try to lose these last 5 pounds or whatever.
Yeah, and it's always, I feel like not always, but it's oftentimes an over preoccupation with like losing 5 pounds, a body fat percentage, like a particular number. It's very like hyper focused on something that someone thinks is like an ideal for themselves. And I still get a lot of athletes that'll come to me and they're like, I want to be like less than 10% body fat because I heard that that's like the ideal. I'm like, all right, well, I guess this message is still being pervaded somewhere, because
Yeah.
they will specifically have like an exact number or like body fat percentage in mind. And then, as a result of that, this either collective thought process or like the individual thought process leads people to extremes with, maybe not like restrictive fueling practices, not eating on their training sessions, et cetera. And I'm not saying always, but it can lead people down the road of like a uh, unhealthy relationship with food, eating disorder, disordered eating. So it can kind of intersect with other eating disorder habits and behaviors down the road.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, on the flip side of being, skinny and small, when I was working in the fitness industry, one of the trainers there that I worked with is a competitive bodybuilder, huge. Like his bicep was like the size of me. Like, not that that's hard probably to do, but he was a big guy. And his thing was like, oh my God, like he definitely had body dysmorphia. He was always like, oh my God, I'm so small. Oh my God, look at my calves. Like I look at him, I just see like a monster, like who can put up massive weight, huge muscles. And he sort of like, I think when he looks in the mirror, he probably almost visualized me. Like he saw this skinny guy, needed to put on more weight. So it was fascinating, his perception of himself. And it wasn't like I worked in a corporate fitness center. It wasn't even like we were like at, Venice Beach where there are all these huge guys. Like they were just, everyone was smaller than him, but he was still like, I'm too small. I need to be bigger. I'm tiny.
It's so interesting you mentioned that because there's actually research that indicates that body image issues are increasing amongst men. The
Hmm.
research is increasing, so that has to be mentioned. But particularly with social media really driving these messages of like hyper masculinity and these like extremely, like men with just very unrealistic, like just Marvel superhero body types that just honestly and respectfully cannot be achieved through entirely wholesome, mentally healthy
Yeah.
humans. And, everyone has their own tightrope to walk when it comes to body image. Like people socialized as women have tough boxes that we're told to fit into, but increasingly men are feeling discomfort around being told to fit into those hyper masculine boxes as well. And so I think that continuing to have discussions that bring men to the table and bring men into these conversations and say like, hey, like I struggle with that too is really, really important, especially in the world of like sports and fitness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think to
Hmm.
your point, Rick, I'd be curious like if that person saying that they like feel like they need to be smaller and voicing that, if that made you feel a certain way, because I think that when someone else voices that and then you hear it, you might be like, well, that person's already small, like, and I might be bigger than them. Like, do I need to get, it's like has this
Right.
like
Mhm.
spiral effect on people because I'll get that from people saying like, my friend said that she needs to lose 5 pounds and like she's smaller than me. Like, do I need to do that too? And then it just kind of can
Yeah.
can kind of go into this spiral.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because like I said, he was a bodybuilder, wanted to get bigger. And like all the guys in the gym that wanted to be big always asked him, like, what are you doing? Like, how do I look like you? Like, in Zoe, to your point, as far as like, just being this big masculine guy, he was it. Like, in my opinion, he had like this sort of perfect like bodybuilder thing. But it was really funny, sort of off topic. Him and I would always debate because I was a competitive runner, competitive cyclist, skinny. And he's like, which sport is stupider, competitive cycling or competitive bodybuilding? And he's like, well, dude, you wear spandex and shave your legs. I'm like, well, you shave too. In fact, like you wear like bikini briefs and put oil over your body. It was like, so we would go at it, but yeah, it was always in good fun. But we both determined both sports were quite stupid. Actually, that was the end result.
It's a great take. Yeah.
But
Agree.
none are more ridiculous than the other. But yeah, he definitely had this thing where he was just like, I'm just tiny. I need to get a lot bigger. I'm like, look at me. Like I'm like weigh like 1 pound compared to you, you know? And
And it's important that you mention that because a lot of, I mean, people with clinical BDD, their struggle will look sort of different, but even folks with like sort of the more colloquial use of the word body dysmorphia or with body image issues, there's always this thought where like, if I can just do this, then I'll love my body. If I can just do this,
oh yeah.
then I'll accept my body. You will never reach that point. That point does not exist. You will
Mhm.
always be in that zone of wanting to just tweak one more thing. If I can just do this, or if I get this PR, or if I hit this number on this scale, or if I, like whatever it is, you will never get there.
Yeah.
And it's so important. I think, again, that's one of the things that is maybe not so great about body positivity is that it sort of forces people to like set, or it can encourage people to set benchmarks for themselves of like, okay, cool, I can get on board, I can love my body when, rather than
Yeah.
just like, you know what, you don't have to love it. Come to the table as you are, you know,
Yeah.
whatever you're bringing, awesome.
Yeah. And that's a great point. I think, you hear that a lot about materialism as well. Like, oh, if I just got that Porsche, then I'd be happy. Okay, I got the Porsche. Well, now I need the vacation home and Telluride, then I'll be happy. And then, but like to your point, it's always one more thing. It's a never ending cycle of I just need one more thing, or if I could just lose 1 more pound or do this to my body, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Or like, what, like even if it's aesthetics or even function, right? Like, oh, I'll start fueling myself as soon as I can run a sub 4 hour marathon, or like,
Mm,
I'll start treating my body with the respect it deserves in recovery as soon as I finish an ultra, or as soon as I get the belt buckle. And
yeah.
again, being like caveating and sort of qualifying your own relationship with your body. I understand the temptation, been there, done that. But it's a pretty slippery slope. And again, you will never get to the most people will never get to that point where they finally tweak that one thing and they've reached unconditional acceptance of their selves and the meat vehicle that they arrived in.
Well,
Right.
the irony there is like the means that someone goes to maybe achieve that typically backfires maybe in the long term, you know? So like maybe it's unintentional like REDS or like red S relative energy deficiency in sport or something, or mental health just being like even more trash because you're not actually fueling yourself, and then that affects your neurotransmitter production and your anxiety levels. So it's like a lot of these things that we think are going to help us in the end can end up backfiring a little bit.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's an inside job, right? Like even if the concern is about something we perceive to be exterior, it's what's going on the inside. It's about control, it's about acceptance, it's about belonging, it's about something else. It's actually an internal mechanism, a mental health mechanism, and there is just nothing you can do to your physical appearance that will heal a brain wound. And so
Yeah.
starting with like where the thing is and really addressing the internal challenges and then letting that sort of go out from there.
Yeah, that's a great point. Not only, I guess, then, or maybe people addressing the wrong area, or at least from an origin standpoint, but these things I feel like endurance athletes are really good at putting things in silos. I feel like, existing in isolation, like here's my bike, here's my shoes, here's my nutrition, here's my mental strategy. But like, I think that as endurance athletes, at least what I found is that like, generally speaking, we're really bad at correlating this stuff. And then in kind of like really looking at okay, let's take it all in consideration. What are some actionable things? It's always like, I just need the faster bike, or I just need this, or I need that. But oh, that has nothing to do with the other thing because I'm not even going to, but it does, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, some amount of like having ambition and motivation as an athlete is like, oh, I want to be a little bit better. I want to push my body a little bit further than I did yesterday. I want to run a little bit faster or bike a little bit further. Like there are healthy ways to want to engage with your body and to want to have like a healthy relationship to, for lack of a better word, like bettering it or improving, even though that's probably not the most nuanced terminology, rather than just setting some like artificial like standard of like I have to hit some number that like a magazine or like I saw in a Facebook post or some guy on the group ride told me.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. So this is maybe sort of a really how honest can we be? Do you guys feel that being underweight or at least having maybe unhealthy habits is really normalized by endurance sports, almost to a drastic amount? Like again, if we look at the elites of the world, right, whether it be runners or cyclists, like this is their profession, whether or not it's healthy or not, this is what they do. But I feel like so much of it is looking at those people and not really realizing that like, okay, this is their job, healthy or not, but regardless, I need to look like that because that's what a real endurance athlete looks like. So how much of it do you guys think is really normalized that, okay, it's okay to have all these problems and issues and eat like weird and want to lose 50 pounds, even though I only have 20 pounds to lose kind of thing?
Pretty frequently. I mean, thinking of like folks like on social media will communicate and message a lot of times around when they have successes, right? Like again, we never know what's going on the inside, but we
Right.
see the post when they get the trophy, they win the race, they do the thing, they qualify, they OTQ, whatever it is. We're gonna see that success because it's gonna be megaphoned at us, but
Yeah.
we don't see the injury cycles. We don't see like all of the downsides that come with
Yeah.
that. We don't see not being able to like go to your kid's birthday party. We don't see your like fingernails becoming brittle and like being cold all the time. We
Mm.
don't see, like your bone density and like we don't see what your bone density is going to look like when you're 60, 70, 80. We can't, have a crystal ball into that person's future. We just get that one tiny little snapshot. But again, our brains are really good at building a narrative around that super narrow snapshot, whether or not it's a truthful narrative or not. So I think that really skews people's perception, and genetics are a thing, and like especially at the top of like really advanced like professional sports, like marathoning, cycling, things like that. Like that might be a genetically self-select group for
Yeah.
people whose bodies might be able to tolerate different things and withstand different amounts of training and just look different because human bodies are amazing and there's a lot of different ways to be a human in a human body. And so trying to you with slightly different genetics than probably whoever won the gold medal in the Olympic marathon, trying to force yourself into someone else's box will just simply never work.
Yeah.
Even functioning on the assumption that it is a box that a human can fit into.
Right.
Well, and something I've appreciated more are the athletes that are like the professional athletes that are talking about struggles more in the sense I'm thinking specifically of like Red S or something, or being honest about their eating disorder, because I actually feel like it helps relate to other people can relate to them and be like, "Oh, wow, okay, like this is something that this person experienced." And even though I viewed them as being like not having any flaws, or like they were perfect in my eyes before because they achieved this thing in their racing or whatever. Now it kind of humanizes them a little bit more, and it's like, okay, these are more like danger things that can happen um, if I am like going to extremes to try and like constantly lose weight, or under fuel or whatever, get to a certain
Yeah.
body look.
Yeah. It's interesting in the cycling world, specifically with women. Very, very rarely will someone come out and say, I have, these are my struggles. You'll often hear it though after they retire. They'll say, oh my gosh, my entire career I was anorexic or I was bulimic or whatever. And not that that doesn't help. Okay, well, you were really good, but you were doing these issues. But I almost think it would almost be more helpful and really, drive it home if someone says, look, I'm performing at the top of my game, but I'm really struggling here, like,
Yeah.
because it versus like some retired, now ex
Yeah.
professional. But I mean, I understand why you wouldn't want to do that probably, but it's just interesting sort of how that you hear it with some frequency when they're retired.
Oh, yeah, yeah, exactly. Or like yeah, when people retire or when, we haven't seen them in competition in a while. And again, it can be really tough to like own that struggle in the
Yeah.
moment, right? Like that's a really vulnerable thing to own up to, just despite the fact that again, research indicates that like a lot, maybe even the major, I mean, if some numbers are to be believed, like the majority of like female trail runners in one study cited having body image struggles. And so,
Mm,
you're in really good company with this, but again, those discussions are not very normalized and that journey is not always normalized. And, being in recovery from an eating disorder as someone that's been in recovery for like 8 years is just like a very messy, non-linear process. So it's
mm.
sort of like telling people like I am actively treading water and I might go under at
Right.
any second. Like it
Yeah,
feels like inviting critique and it can feel like inviting people into
sure.
like come monitor my recovery and judge accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
especially in
it
the world
sort of
of,
takes getting to that really sturdy place in your recovery to be able to own it in a way that feels good and authentic to you.
Yeah, and I think especially in the age of social media, it would be one thing if we were back in the age of print magazines, right, where someone would have to write into the editor to say something, right? But now I can just go right on your post and be like make 1,000 comments. So I could understand the
Well, and
hesitancy there.
I've heard from athletes that like more professional athletes that have been a little more public with eating disorder stuff that like any decision that they make and they're public about, like as far as say they got an injury and but they are like it's not necessarily related to their eating disorder history, but everyone assumes then that it's related to their eating
Mm,
disorder.
Yeah.
There's a
sure.
lot of assumptions to Zoe's point that like if you become public about it, then you're kind of like being judged in a way,
Mhm.
which
Yeah, yeah,
is can be really hard.
Yeah, and
yeah,
for a while I really like intentionally did not speak about being in recovery because I had concerns about being like pigeonholed of like eating disorder recovery girl.
sure.
And it almost becoming like a shtick or an identity. And it took me a while to get to the place where I was like, that's just one thing in the beautiful sort of tapestry that is all the stuff, the rich stuff I have going on.
Yep,
And I think again, the more that folks come out and talk about it and say like, this is just one part of my little
yeah,
cycling story here, one thread in the overall thing.
yeah. That's a great point. That's a great point. So knowing that a lot of coaches listen to this podcast, if a coach suspects that one of their athletes or even just someone they know, might have body dysmorphia, disordered eating, what is there an action plan? Is there sort of an approach to speak to this person? I didn't know if you guys might have any sort of information or thoughts on that topic.
Get a team.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah,
talked about that before though.
we have. Yeah.
No,
Yep.
I think that's a lot. I mean, it's hard because coaches, sometimes I think in an athlete's mind are expected to like take on the role of all these other professionals too.
Yeah.
Like you need to be the therapist and you also need to be the dietitian and like you need to be the PT. And it's like, well, you can give some general guidance on some of these things and that's great. But like, in the instance of if it is, body dysmorphia disorder, like we need mental health professionals to be able to help this person,
Yeah.
and I think as a coach, one of the best things you can do is like be a good listener, ask questions, and then have people that you trust to like refer that athlete to. And you might
Yeah.
have to get to a point though with the athlete, like building rapport with an athlete is really important. Like if it's
Yeah.
like a new athlete that you just got like 2 weeks ago and you're recognizing this, it might not be the initial time to be like, I think you need this whole team, but
Right.
starting like getting to know them as a person and then having some conversation and asking the right questions, I think can really help because it helps people feel seen and heard, which they might not have felt that way before in their past. And then also it helps them feel like, oh, wow, like this coach actually cares about me, that they enough so that they're like, okay, like I think that getting this team of people will be the most effective way to get you to the next level.
Yeah. Yeah.
Agreed.
Great point.
Curiosity, compassion, and having a network that you feel comfortable like connecting people with, and folks that you trust will take care of the people that you really care about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a
Being
great point.
prepared, oh, sorry, being prepared for like maybe an athlete not taking it the right way when you approach them about it too,
Yeah.
but being okay with like approaching it, bringing it to the table, allowing for the athlete to think about that, and then maybe revisiting it in the future if they don't take it in the right way the first time it's approached, because eating is very personal, and there are a lot of again, mental health things that can be tied up within the eating component. And so it can be tricky to for an athlete to fully like see themselves clearly too. And so someone pointing that out can be a really like life-saving thing in a way, but it can be really hard to hear in the moment sometimes.
Yeah.
Knowing and owning the limits of your scope of practice is important and the number one thing you have to do, but B, that's an incredible opportunity to build trust with someone. Like
Yeah.
owning where your limits are is so incredibly important. And I think sometimes there can be a dynamic where someone who's maybe not doesn't know that they're maybe ready to receive help or not might think like, oh, I don't need a therapist. I just need, it's a fitness thing. Like if I
Yeah.
don't really have like a body image thing, I need to get faster. Or like they might think, oh, I need to work with Kylee. And it's sort of this way of like them maybe not quite recognizing that there's a mental health thing here and thinking that they can fix it again with like some external thing rather than going internal and addressing the underlying mental health thing and potentially, addressing the complicated relationship with movement and complicated relationship with food. So that's like at minimum a team of 3 people
Yeah.
But
that'd
that's
be
right.
good.
No, it's great. It's always great when an athlete comes to me first and they're like, "Oh, I need help with my fueling." And then I'm the one that has to like ask the right questions to get them to realize, "Oh yeah, I need this therapist on
Yeah.
this too."
Yeah.
So that's the
Yeah.
hard part of my job too, is helping athletes recognize that like that it's not necessarily just like the food and the fueling. It's actually there's a lot more to this than just eating around your training and during your training or something.
Yeah, and you mentioned rapport, and when we did one of the presentations at our conference with Dr. Justin Ross, the psychologist who works with a lot of athletes, his main thing is like usually just coming out and saying, "Hey, you need a therapist." That doesn't usually land very well.
No,
He's like,
no,
you
no.
need that rapport. You need to know the person's personality. You need to appreciate, to have these types of conversations. Um, to your point, maybe not everyone will reply positively, but probably the better rapport you have, the more they know it's coming from the right place and they trust you and so on and so forth. Um, so last thing for us today. So within the endurance sports industry, what do you guys think the endurance sports industry and maybe even sports specific could do as a whole to really reduce the overemphasis on, hyper low body weight, disordered eating, body dissatisfaction, sort of the whole gamut? What are some things the endurance sports industry could do to really better some of these areas where maybe these issues don't go away, but they're reduced?
Yeah, I think really, I mean, I I always like to point to science as the solution, but when you look at the actual evidence, the data, the science that exists here, performance exists in so many different and diverse body types. That is so freaking cool, and I think we could all celebrate that a lot more. I would love to see the media again bringing that in, complicating our cultural narratives around body image and body weight and what it means to look like an athlete or be an athlete, just like adding in the nuance that exists in the research that shows that you can look and show up in a lot of different bodies and still kick absolute ass at your sport of choice.
Yeah.
And I think from just a marketing perspective, companies looking at the language that they use in their marketing materials and promotion of certain products that they might be putting out there, I think is really important. So say we have like a ketone company or a gel company that's like talking about like low carb or like not, you don't need carbs, you need ketones, and like then
Suppress your hunger, lose
suppressing
weight.
hunger and
Yeah.
losing weight
Yeah.
in a product that's intended for endurance athletes and performance, like that's reinforcing this idea that we need to lose weight as endurance athletes.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, whether or not it's directly saying it or through products being offered, that's a great point. Well, thank you guys all so much for your time on not just this one, but the other two podcasts. I mean, you guys have such a wealth of information. If you guys are up for it, I would love to do another podcast series on a different topic realm.
Oh yeah, that'd be
Absolutely.
great. We would love that.
it. Yeah, we'll talk
Cool.
about food, body, movement, sports all day.
Let's do it. So, for all of our listeners, like I said in the beginning, please check out Your Diet Sucks podcast if you want to learn more about what Kylee and Zoe have to say. If anyone's interested in a USCA certification, you guys can use the code ATE75 for $75 off. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. And yeah, we will converse off of the podcast to discuss what our new series will be.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.